Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during the presentations today, please type them into the Q&A icon on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. I'd like to welcome everybody to the April 30th edition of Crop Talk. And if you're like me, I know it's always after the long winter, it's always good to get a refresher on things when you're going out to the field and seeing whether it be weeds or whether it be just different things growing. And I thought it'd be a good idea if we could get Kim Brown to come on and give us a crash course in broadleaf weed ID. There's so many weeds out there now. It seems like it's getting harder to identify or get the big differences between them, especially when they're small. And so as we're going to be going out to the field here over the next little while, and actually, I guess some people are in the field already. So as we're out there, it'd be just good to know or get a refresher course as to what's going on out there. So Kim's going to start with broadleaf weed ID and maybe some control measures of some of the harder ones, and then from there we'll go into some other slides regarding what's going on, where we are at the seeding. So with that, I will hand it over to Kim, and we'll start with the weed seeding ID.
Okay, just give me a second to get up and going here. Thanks very much, Lionel, for asking me here today. I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm going to start off with talking about our the last time that we did a herbicide resistance survey when we did our abundance survey in 2022, because I don't get much of a chance to talk about this stuff. I'm usually talking about other kind of more pressing problems, but I want to go over some of those weeds just so you guys have an idea of some of the things that we have seen in our last weed survey. And we actually are doing another weed survey in 2026, and then we'll be on a 5-year schedule after that. So we will be updating these weed surveys now on a very regular basis. It's been a bit hit and miss in the past. You'll see that when I show you some of the data. But I'll start with that. And then Lionel's given me some really great pictures, and so we're going to move into those. And then I'll just talk about if we've got questions, I can try and answer those as best I can. So you guys can see my screen okay? Are we good to go?
You bet. Yep, we're good.
Okay, yeah, we can.
Thanks. Okay. Yep. Okay. So basically, anybody who's seen me talk all winter, I'm showing you this slide. One of the reasons that we're struggling so much with herbicide resistance and some of the weeds that we're trying to kill is that we have not had any new herbicide groups for a very long time. This graph shows the years that different herbicide groups were discovered and we started to use them. And again, we start way back here in basically in World War II using group 4. So we've been using 2,4-D and MCPA basically unchanged for over 80 years. And so as you know, over time, as different herbicides became available, here's our group 15s. That's kind of some old grass herbicides. Those actually were developed very quickly after group 4s were being used so widespread, because there actually was the farmers were finding that there was a lot more grass weeds now in their fields, because the group 4s, the 2,4-D, the MCPA, were working so well at taking out the broadleaf weeds. And over time, here's group 5. That was about 1950. That's atrazine and simazine and metribuzin, things like that. Here's group 3. That's edge and treflan and those type herbicides in here. Here's group 6. That's Pardner. Pardner's been out since about the mid 1960s, and we're still using it to this day, and it's in a lot of different products. Here's our group 14s. That is not a new group. We haven't really been using a lot of those until fairly recently, but group 14s have been out since the mid 1960s. Here's our group 1s, or there's group 9. That's glyphosate in there. So that was in the early 70s is when glyphosate was first discovered and first started to be used. Here's our group 1s. Those are the herbicides that we use. Those are graminicides, so they kill grass weeds, and some of them we use in broadleaf crops to kill volunteer cereals and grass weeds. And then, of course, there's the ones that we use in our cereal crops to kill things like wild oats and green foxtail and barnyard grass and things like that. This group 10 over here, that's Liberty. That was in the 70s. And then group 27s are fairly recent. We're using those. We've been using, the one we've used the most is Infinity. That's been around for quite a long time. But we're also using things like Armazon and Lotus and Shield X and Callisto in corn as well. The newest group that we've actually had access to is group 13. That was about the early 1980s. That was clomazone, or that is clomazone, and we don't use that very much. It's really only used in canola. Now it has a dry bean registration as well, and it really just does one weed. It does cleavers. It does a good job on cleavers, and it also, I think, gets you suppression of chickweed. There's a group out here, this group 28. There's nothing usable in that for us right now. Right now, those are pretty much exclusively rice herbicides, and at some point we might get something. But when you look at this, we haven't had anything new since the mid 1980s. We have not had a new herbicide group. We sometimes get new families within those groups. And so in our group 4s, which is a very, very old group, we do have some new families in there. Arylex, which is a really nice molecule from Corteva. That is a new family within that group 4. Within the group 14s, there are some new families as well. There's some kind of some new generation group 14s, even though that group itself is older. But that's still not a new herbicide group. So even if we do have new products, they're still killing the weeds in the same way because they're still part of an existing group. So this is the problem, is that we really don't have any new groups that kill weeds in a new way. So even if we do get a new product, it's still killing weeds the same way. So if we start to get resistance to that group, it's probably going to be resistant to a lot of the products in the different families in that same group. So again, this is not new. We still don't have anything new. We may have something new coming in a few years from Bayer. There's something on the horizon, but that's a few years away yet. So this is the reality, and this is what we're dealing with, and this is what we have to work with going forward for at least the next couple of years. And basically, the herbicides that we have is basically all that we have. So this is an older slide, and this is talking about how herbicides develop, or how weeds develop resistance to herbicides. And these numbers across the bottom of the scale, that's not an absolute number. That's going to depend on an awful lot of things. It's going to depend on basically the level of selection, basically how well the herbicide works. And the better it works, actually, the faster resistance can develop to it. The number of applications over a number of years, and also how much residue is left behind from that herbicide. But basically, when you're looking at percent resistance, when you start off using a herbicide, there's going to be some very, very low level of resistance in our field anyways. Just if you have 1 million plants out on a field, there's going to be just the chances are that 1 or 2 of them are just going to be different, and they're going to have a natural resistance to whatever we're spraying. That just happens because not all plants are exactly alike. And then over time, as we still keep using that herbicide, and if it's working really, really well and it's killing all the ones that aren't resistant to it, then over time, the ones that are resistant get to be the only ones left behind, and they get to, they do really well. We're basically selecting for them. And so you'll see really, really low levels of resistance for quite a long time. And then all of a sudden, we start to see a bit more weeds. And usually by the time we're here, we notice that you see there's something going on. We're missing some weeds. There's some patches out there. Things aren't working. You start to suspect, and very, very quickly, you can get to full-blown resistance very quickly at that point. And by then, you're too late. The products are just not going to work anymore. So that's just, again, that is the way weeds develop resistance to the herbicides we're using. And there's really not a lot we can do about it except to try to stretch out, do different things to stretch out the amount of time we've got before those herbicides become ineffective. This is from a website here called Prairie Weed Monitoring Network. This is a really nice network. This is from basically all of these people down here are funding this website. And so we actually have a prairie insect monitoring network and a prairie disease monitoring network as well. On the weed monitoring network is where there's going to be a lot of publications, and a lot of the weed surveys are going to be housed there. There's resources and material available for farmers and agronomists to use. And this is the basically the latest copy of the herbicide resistant weeds in the prairie region. And we add to this all the time. And so this is basically separated out by groups. Here's our group 5s. Again, that's atrazine and metribuzin or Sencor, things like that. Here's our group 14 weeds. We know we have kochia, water hemp, and wild oat are resistant to the group 14s already. Here's our group 1 weeds. And of course, we know we have green foxtail, yellow foxtail, wild oats, that type of thing resistant to group 1s across the prairies. Here's our glyphosate resistant weeds here in gray. So far, we only have kochia, downy brome, and water hemp. But again, we're always watching. This big group in here, though, This is our group 2, our ALS inhibitors, and this is a big group of broadleaf and grass weeds. And so we know, and this is growing every year too. So we know that this is a huge problem, is the amount of group 2 resistant weeds we have. And then we've got our group 4 resistant weeds, despite the fact that group 4s are one of the oldest herbicide groups that we've been using, basically unchanged over the last 80 years. There isn't a lot of herbicide resistant weeds or weeds that are resistant to those herbicides, because the way that the group 4s work, it's really complex, and it was really only just recently understood it. And it's a very complex way how they work in a plant, how they kill a plant. And because of that, it's not very easy for a weed to overcome that. If it's a fairly simple way to kill a weed, weeds can overcome that through a number of different ways, and resistance can actually come on quite quickly. And that's actually what happened with the group 2s. There was resistance within a couple of years of them actually being introduced and starting to be used, whereas our group 4s, and it's good that this has taken a long time. We don't have a lot of resistant weeds, and those products are still working really, really very well for us. But we do know that we have cleavers, hemp nettle, kochia. That's one that we're quite concerned about. We see the group 4 resistance rising in that, and wild mustard as well. And then group 3, this is edge and treflan. And so confirmed resistance, we have green foxtail, but we know that we have some unconfirmed populations of red root pigweed as well. And so we'll be working on getting official confirmation of those. So just be careful if you've been using a lot of group 3s in the past. Watch the red root pigweed. You may start to see some of those break through, that those group 3s aren't working very well anymore. So with that, I'm going to talk about the herbicide-resistant weed surveys. You've heard me talk about this before. We've done them. The last weed survey that we had, basically, at the time across the prairies, we had about 24 million acres infested across the prairies. Manitoba, we had about 68% of our fields had at least one herbicide-resistant weed in them. When we're looking at the surveys, we've been doing them in this form from basically the late 1970s all the way up to 2022. Again, we're going to do one in 2026, and then every 5 years after that. So we basically do an abundance survey, and so we rank our weed species by relative abundance, which is a combination of relative frequency within the field, relative field uniformity within that field, and density, how many weeds are in that field. And you can see over the years we've increased the number of weeds, but we're sitting somewhere between 600 and 700 fields that we survey when we do this survey. And this is just another thing. This is housed on that. This poster is housed at that Prairie Weed Monitoring Network. Or if anybody wants these, I can send you PDFs of this. But this just shows our last survey. This is our top 20 weeds and where they rank in relative abundance. And basically, just things to note in the last survey, we are finding more and more cleaner fields. We've got there's less density. We've got less weeds, and we've actually got fields in general are just cleaner, which of course, is indicative of us over the years doing a really good job on weed control. The exception would be when we start to see resistant weeds in there start showing up in there when the herbicides just aren't able to work anymore. And then over here, we've got basically species shifts. And you can see over here, foxtail barley has moved up significantly since the surveys have been done in this form over the last 40 years. And green foxtail has basically stayed the same. It's right here. It's basically been our number one weed all the way through. And so there's a few more things. Here's our top 10 weeds in here, which are green foxtail, wild buckwheat, volunteer canola. That one's moved up significantly in the last number of years. Lamb's quarters, red root pigweed, yellow foxtail, barnyard grass species. There's a couple different species of them, but I just lumped them all into one. They're really hard to tell apart which one's which. Volunteer wheat, wild oats, and roundleaf mallow. Wild oats had dropped in the last survey, but we had a really wet spring and we had a lot of late seeding. And that's kind of, I was not surprised to see that drop a bit. And I think if we have a more normal year and a more normal seeding times, I would expect to see wild oats come back up in ranking in the next weed survey. I guess it'll just depend what that year looks like. And we did see wild oats last year was a year that we had a lot of wild oats surface. Everybody seemed to have issues with wild oats again, but in the year of this that we did this survey, it wasn't really a very big wild oat year, so it actually had dropped. And then roundleaf mallow rounds out that top 10. And so you can see here, these are resistant weeds, anything in red. The resistant weeds are weeds that have moved up in ranking over the last 40 years. And then these weeds, the greens down here, are the weeds that had moved down, the resistant weeds that actually had moved down in ranking a bit. So just to kind of show you where some of these things are moving over time. When we're looking at species weed shifts, just to tease that out a little bit more, some of the things that we really notice, again, here's green foxtail. That's been number one all the way along. Wild buckwheat's always in the top 2 or the top 3. It's very similar. Canola's moved up significantly since the last survey, the last big survey in 2002. We hadn't done a survey in quite a while. But we did 2002, we did 2016, and then we did 2022. Yellow foxtail has moved up significantly in the last number of years. And in the past, too, we may not have been identifying it correctly. A lot of people still lump it in with green foxtail. If you're not looking closely, they look a lot alike. But also, too, we do know that we have selected for yellow foxtail over time because some of the older corn herbicides and some herbicides just do a better job on green foxtail and don't do as good a job on yellow foxtail. So again, there's green foxtail, barnyard grass species. Again, it's moved up significantly since the start of the survey, but it moved down a little bit, but that's something that we are seeing more of. Wild oats, again, had moved down a little bit, but I wouldn't worry about that. We know it's always going to be in our top 10, and lots of times it's in our top 5 weeds. And then over here, foxtail barley, that had moved up significantly, especially since the late 80s. Talking about the methodology, I'll just go quickly through this. When we talk about our resistance survey now, we do those 700 fields for abundance. We come back and we basically look at about a quarter of those. We did 155 of those fields, and we go harvest all the weed seeds that we can find. And then those weed seeds are grown out, and so they're sent to Ag Canada in Lethbridge, and they're grown out, and then they're sprayed with all the things that are basically supposed to kill them. Well, not all the things, but basically tier 1 groups 1 and 2. So tier 1 ACCAs and ALS inhibiting herbicides, and basically herbicides are applied at the proper stage, and if the weeds don't die, then they're considered to be resistant. And so just the fields that we do our top 6 fields. We try to do most of our fields in the top 6 crops in the province, which are canola, wheat, and then soybean, and then oats, green corn, barley as well. We also did a few fields of peas, pinto beans, and sunflowers. So overall, though canola is about a third of the fields that we do, we're in because that's about a third of the acres that we grow in Manitoba. And so the fields are chosen based on our cropping choices, our long-term cropping choices. So you can see that we're trying to, when we choose our fields properly, we can take that data off this small number of fields, and we can extrapolate that and make it into something that, we can extrapolate that and make that into something that we can use across the whole province, where we can say, okay, this is what this should look like province-wide if we've chosen our fields correctly on the smaller number of fields that we survey. So these are just some of the herbicides we tested. It's Puma, Advance, Assure, Liquid Achieve, Centurion, Solo, Pursuit, Arsenal, Refine, Teller, that's the old Glean, and then Roundup, of course. In the 2022 survey, just looking at where we're at here, this was our 2016 survey in here, and we are still continue to increase the amount of herbicide-resistant weeds we're finding. These herbicide-resistant weed these curves here are never going to go down. Once you have resistant weeds on farm, they're there for life. You're not going to see this line go down. It can taper off a bit, not maybe go up quite as on a sharp angle. It could flatline, but it is never going to go down. And you can see Manitoba is this top line here. For some reason, we've always had a little bit more herbicide resistance than the other 2 prairie provinces, and we have tapered off a little bit. Saskatchewan and Alberta, though, have almost caught up to us now. In the tested fields of the 155 fields, you can see them all over here. All these black dots is where we were testing the fields that we actually found the weed seeds in. And of the fields that we tested, 80% of them had at least 1 herbicide-resistant weeds. When we extrapolate that up to the whole province, basically the 10 or 11 million acres of cropland across the province, it's about 75% of the fields now. So 3 out of 4 fields now have at least 1 herbicide-resistant weed, which had increased from 68% in the last survey. And field coverage was pretty much about half the fields. So we were finding that the weeds are covering a fair bit of land now. And basically, based on a survey that farmers filled out, these herbicide-resistant weeds were estimated to cost Manitoba farmers about $81 million, either in lost revenue or added costs from using extra herbicides to go after these herbicide-resistant weeds. So just talking about the weeds themselves that we were testing. Now, kochia is more of a difficult one to test. We do actually do late season herbicide testing, or late season weed testing. I guess, weed gathering on kochia because sometimes a lot of the seeds aren't quite viable yet at harvest. So that's another survey that we're going to do, a separate survey next year as well. But in the survey, we did find some kochia where the seed was viable. Basically, it's basically all group 2 resistant. Of the tested fields, we found it was 100% resistant, but extrapolating that to all fields in Manitoba, it was only 19%. But again, those numbers are we prefer to do our kochia, things like kochia and Russian thistle. We prefer to do those with a later season survey when more seed is viable. So, but we're not surprising that we did find group 2 resistant because kochia has been group 2 resistant across the province for a very long time. We're looking at our pigweeds, mostly red root pigweed, but we now separate out green pigweed as well. And so finding that we do definitely have group 2 resistant pigweeds growing in Manitoba. Of the tested fields, 31% were found to have, where we found the pigweed, you can see the blue dots are where we found susceptible pigweeds or group 2 resistant pigweeds. And when you extrapolate that across the whole province, it's about 13% of the pigweed across the province is expected to have group 2 resistance in it. When we're looking at pale smartweed, and there's different smartweeds, there's pale smartweed, there's green smartweed, and there's lady's thumb. I generally lump them all together. They're a little hard, they're pretty hard to tell apart, and I would basically be treating them all the same. I don't really know that you can separate them out. I don't really know of any products that do specifically better on one of the smartweeds than the other 2 species that we're dealing with. But when it comes to group 2 resistance, we know, again, you can see the blue dots here where we actually found those weeds. And we found that where we found it, 76% of those fields where we found it was resistant to group 2, but extrapolated to across the province, about 10% now is exhibiting resistance to group 2 herbicides. We're looking at false cleavers, and I just call it all cleavers. I wouldn't worry about the name there, but there is a couple of different cleaver species, and technically the one we have in Manitoba is called false cleavers. But again, that's not something to really worry about. Didn't really find not a lot of hits here. Not surprising to see it up here in the north and the northwest here. And of the tested fields, it was in 40% of those fields. It was resistant to group 2, but extrapolated across the province, that's basically 1% of the fields. So not a lot province-wide, but in the areas where we found cleavers, it was resistant to group 2. And here's shepherd's purse, again, starting to see some group 2 resistance in there as well. And if you remember back to that poster I showed you, there's just a lot of group 2 resistant weeds, and we're finding more all the time. There's a couple of spots where we found over here on the eastern side of the province, and then over here north of Brandon, or quite a bit north of Brandon, actually. Anyways, tested fields, about 50% of them did have resistant shepherd's purse, but that's extrapolates only to 1% across the whole province. And then looking at chickweed, where we found chickweed, we didn't find a lot of it, not surprising, it's up here in the northwest. And where we did find it, it was resistant to group 2. And again, that's not surprising. I've worked up in the Dauphin and Swan River area, and we know that there's definitely group 2 resistant chickweed up there. But extrapolated to across the province, it's less than 1%. So there are a few new herbicide-resistant broadleaf weeds, and so there needs to be more testing done to kind of tease this out and see what level of resistance is there. But from the initial studies, it showed up for the first time in the 2022 survey, so we would expect to see these going forward. We did find spiny sow thistle was resistant to group 2, actually in quite a few spots around the province. All these blue dots is where we found it. 59% of the tested fields, it was resistant, and then that extrapolates to 7% across Manitoba. We also found lamb's quarters and resistant to group 2. And so you can see these blue dots kind of scattered all around the province, not a lot in the north there, but basically, this southern part of the province, we found quite a bit of it. Again, only 12% of the tested fields and really only 4% province-wide, but it is something to be aware of. Do get a lot of calls on resistant lamb's quarters. I'm going to talk about that later on. Lionel sent me some good pictures, but a lot of issues with lamb's quarters. It's not so much necessarily the resistance, but it's a hard to wet weed, and then it's also a weed that gets out of stage very, very quickly. So it's something to watch for. But we know we do definitely have some group 2 resistance, and I don't have any documented resistance to any other herbicide groups at this time, not for lamb's quarters. And then horseweed, that's basically fleabane or Canada fleabane is what we call it. It's sometimes called horseweed, or it's sometimes called mare's tail. And we do know that we have group 2 resistance here. We found some here in the central part of Manitoba. And so a third of the fields that we tested where we found it, it was resistant, but province-wide, that only extrapolates out to 1%. We don't see a lot of this province-wide, but we are starting to see more horseweed. And I do urge people to be watching for this. I think it's our next bad news problem when it comes to glyphosate-resistant weeds. Elsewhere in North Dakota and in Ontario, it has been glyphosate resistant and group 2 resistant for a very long time. And so it's just a matter of time before that starts showing up in the province. So that is something to keep an eye on. But we know we definitely now have documented group 2 resistance, and we've had some unconfirmed suspected cases of glyphosate resistance. So we're watching those populations as well. So again, that's something to really keep an eye on. Get familiar with horseweed or Canada fleabane or mare's tail, whatever you want to call it, and just make sure you're able to identify that. So basically, the conclusions from the last herbicide resistant weed survey, that where we found weeds and in the fields that we tested, about 80% or 8 out of 10 of those fields had at least herbicide resistant weeds. Had at least one herbicide-resistant weed. When you extrapolate that to all of Manitoba, we've got 75%, or basically 3 out of 4 fields will now have at least one herbicide-resistant weed in there, and that is not going down. The field coverage, that looks like we're covering about half of the field or about half of the province, and so again, we're looking at patch area and field area here. Like, we're looking at a significant amount of acres are now have at least one herbicide-resistant weed. And so some of the new things, I talked about some of the grasses earlier, about a month ago. I think we talked about some of the grasses in a crop talk there. That's on our YouTube channel. And now the newer ones that have showed up for the first time in this last survey are things like quackgrass, another grass, but that's a group 2 resistant grass, spiny sow thistle, lamb's quarters, and horseweed as well. So things definitely to be aware of when you're choosing products this spring, to make sure you've got something other than a group 2 in the tank if you've got some of those weeds on farm. So there's the funders of our survey, and then I'm going to start with some pictures that Lionel has sent me. So Lionel sent some really nice pictures. So this would either be night flower and catch fly or white cockle, because you can see hairs on it. It looks like this is rosette, but it's actually not. And it's hard to see these because they actually are so low growing. But what I do with these is I always pull them up out of the ground and I turn them upside down and I kind of start peeling the leaves off. And you can see that they are opposite leaves, because anything in the pink family or the Carolophalaceae family, which is what these are, they will have opposite leaves. And when the stems stretch out later, you can see this. But early on, when these are winter annuals, like I suspect these are right now, you can't really see that, and they kind of fool you. So with these ones, though, I would be pulling these out of the ground. I'd turn them upside down. I start peeling the leaves off, and you can see that they're in pairs, and they'll be and that's something you can kind of see it maybe in this one, these 2 leaves here. When they have opposite leaves, they should have leaves that are 180 degrees opposite to each other, and then the next set will come like this, and those leaves should be the same size. But again, it's really hard to see because this is so low growing, and it's really hard to see on that. But night flower and catch fly or white cockle are both hairy, really hard to tell apart at this stage what they are. And there's also going to be bladder campion and cow cockle as well. Those aren't nearly as prevalent across the province, but we do see a lot of night flower and catch fly up north. I saw a lot more white cockle than night flower and catch fly. But again, these are in that pink family or that carnation family, and something like a fluorasulum, anything with fluorasulum is any product that contains that molecule is something that usually works really well on these, but you have to get at these pretty early. These are already big, and they can get really big, especially if they're behaving as winter annuals. They can be spring annuals or winter annuals, but when they're winter annuals, they get pretty big pretty quick. So again, thanks Lionel for some really good pictures. Lamb's quarters, and this is just to show, I mean, I don't think we have any lamb's quarters up yet. I haven't seen any, but I would suspect with the temperatures coming in the next week or so, we're definitely going to see a huge flush of weeds coming, because we've all had little sprinkles of rain. I think we've got decent enough soil moisture right now, and with the heat that's coming basically starting by Sunday, I think we're going to see a ton of weeds pop up. And the issues with lamb's quarters are that it gets really big really fast. I mean, this one right here is probably only an inch or 2, not even 2 inches tall off the ground, and it's already got 4 full leaves on it. So when you're looking at your staging, a lot of your products are only up to the 6 or 8 leaf stage. We're technically at, well, we're not quite at 6 leaf stage on this one here because these leaves aren't out and unfolded yet, but we're very, very close to this being a lamb's quarters with 6 full leaves on it. And so when you're going after lamb's quarters, you really have to watch your staging. And I think it just, a lot of times when we have misses, it's because it gets out of stage so quickly, we've missed it. And it's also a very hard to wet weed. It has kind of a very waxy coating on it. It has these salt secretions on the leaf. It's a very hard to wet weed. And so we have to make sure that we're using the proper adjuvants, whatever the recommended adjuvant is. Use lots of water volume, use really good water when you can. You know, you need to have access to good water, and make sure you're using the right adjuvants and make sure you're using a good product. But again, you've got to watch your staging. This thing it's got a lot of leaves, even though it's still a very small plant. It has a lot of leaves on it. So cleavers, again, lots of it overwinters. It can start from spring as well. Anything basically fluroxapyr, anything with fluroxapyr is a really good product for cleavers. This is getting to be pretty big already, but you've got to be going after that. When we get into the dry cycles, we don't see cleavers nearly as much, but I would expect to be seeing some cleavers now in the wetter areas of the province, and so something to keep an eye on for sure. We don't see this all through the province. I don't hardly ever see it down here, kind of in the southern half of the province, but definitely in the west and in the northwest, where it tends to be a little bit wetter, we see lots of this. Milkweed. Now, this is another great picture from Lionel. Actually, all these pictures today are from Lionel, so thanks very much, Lionel, for sending those. Milkweed is just something that I'm getting lots and lots of calls on all the time now, and this is something that it's really seeming to be much more of a problem in a lot more areas of the province that more so than I used to worry about. And one of the issues is we don't have any really good milkweed products anymore. We used to have Amatrol. It's been gone for a very long time. It's actually deregistered. So even if you have some, you're technically not supposed to be using it anymore. But that product is gone. And that was a really, really good milkweed product. It did a great job. Products we have now just really don't do a very good job on milkweed. If you have milkweed starting to show up in the fields, one of the best things you can do is a pre-harvest roundup. You know, that would have been helpful last year. But going forward, if you're starting to see milkweed patches show up, one of the better ways to take care of that weed is pre-harvest roundup. This is a perennial weed, especially like common milkweed is a perennial weed. There's a big root system underground, and it's just a really tough weed to kill. And your in-crop products, they'll yellow it up and they'll maybe set it back a bit, but they really don't seem to do a good job of getting rid of it because it is a perennial weed. So that pre-harvest roundup is something that you really need to take a look at, and also talk to your RMs about this. We see a lot of this coming up out of the ditches, and whether or not you're in an RM that has a weed supervisor or like a weed that's part of a weed district and has a weed board and has a weed supervisor, they may be unaware of the patches of milkweed, and even if they're not able to get a spray program going, but even to get mowing it before it sets seed, because it's perennial, it'll move by like underground root system, but it also moves by seed, or the seed will fly around and float around and stuff. And so if you can at least stop some of that seed set and stop that seed from spreading, that'll stop it from spreading further into the fields. But really be watching the ditches. When you see those big patches in the ditches, it is not very long before you'll start to see those in the field as well. And this is just a really tough weed to get out of there once it gets a foothold in the fields. Okay, field horsetail or scouring rush. I don't know. I just call it all equisetum. I don't really worry about what it actually is. There's 3 or 4 different kinds of field horsetail across the province, or scouring rush, whatever you want to call it. This is a really tough one. It has also a perennial weed. Has a huge underground root system that goes really, really deep, like as deep as 20 feet deep into the soil. So it's a tough one to get. Tillage is not going to get this weed. You'll see it in areas where you've got it, they can be maybe spongy areas of the field, or just areas where there's a high water table, because this is a weed that uses a lot of water. So maybe not the most productive areas of the field either, but it can take over acres and acres sometimes, depending on the field. And it's a really tough one to get rid of. Glyphosate really isn't going to touch this one. Liberty really doesn't touch it. Surprisingly, MCPA is one of your better products to use on this, and also anything containing Arylex or the haloxyphene active ingredient from the Corteva products does a pretty good job at beating this back. But it is a perennial weed, and it's there because there's a lot of water underground, and it's taking advantage of that water underground in the area that it's growing in. So it's something to be aware of, but it is a tough one to get rid of. It's a hard one when it's established. It's kind of, you're always battling these horsetail or these equisetum patches. Rough cinquefoil, we see this show up every once in a while. I'm not really worried about this being all through a field. Sometimes you'll see it on the edge of the field. You'll almost always see this in old yard sites and things like that, or coming off. Yeah. Anyways, you won't see a lot of this right scattered throughout the whole field. It's not super competitive either. It fools a lot of people. Like it can look really it looks a lot like, it can look a lot like hemp nettle as well. But I think this one is rough cinquefoil. I'm not sure. I can't really tell by the picture, but it could be hemp nettle or rough cinquefoil. Hemp nettle, obviously, we're much more concerned about, but rough cinquefoil, I wouldn't be too terribly worried about. But again, watch the hemp nettle as well, because that's another weed that, like, very much like lamb's quarters, that can get very big very fast, and you have to be on top of that one. I think this is yellow evening primrose just by the look of the picture. I'd have to take a look at it up close, and I'd have to see exactly where it is in the field. Sometimes we see these on field edges and they look really big. It's a biennial weed. So if we're in the second year of it, it's big by now. And then they'll shoot up and they'll get to be very tall weeds with kind of yellow flowers on the top. But I think this is what this is, and you just don't see a lot of them. I mean, you can see there's some little wild buckwheat here, very, very small wild buckwheat all around it. So obviously this is overwintered, or I do believe it's a biennial, so it's going into its second year. And you don't see these scattered all through a field. The only time I've ever heard of that was a field coming out of organic production that had quite a lot of this all through the field, but that's really rare. So if you see this on a field edge and it looks like a big ugly weed, it's not really something to worry about. There's not going to be a lot of it. It's really only on that field edge. And then wild buckwheat, Lionel sent some really nice pictures here. Sometimes you'll see this you'll see these sometimes this red stem, and sometimes the leaves are right across opposite each other, and sometimes they're on a bit more of an angle. This one's got something's been chewing on it, or it's been busted off. But you always, when wild buckwheat starts, you'll see these long kind of skinny cotyledons, and then lots of times you see like a little stick that comes out, and if you look at it, you'll see the leaves will actually start to unfurl. If I go back, there's actually some good pictures here too. This is some good pictures of wild buckwheat just starting, and you'll see these leaves sometimes on a bit of an angle like this, not straight across from each other, but you don't always see that, so you can't go by that. And then you see these little sticks. I'm trying to circle that there. You'll see looks like a little stick come out, and then that leaf will actually unroll and look like something like this here. This is a wild buckwheat with a couple of leaves on it still. And wild buckwheat is a harder one to get. Glyphosate alone just doesn't touch it. You've got to be throwing in some other products as well. And your group 14s and things like that. And there's lots of good products that do a good job on wild buckwheat. But glyphosate alone doesn't touch it. And we should not be ever spraying glyphosate alone anymore for burn down anyways. So flicksweed, we're seeing more and more of this. It's pretty easy to kill, but lots of times you see lots of really finely divided leaves. The very first true leaves look like this. They only have 3 lobes on them. And then as soon as you get past those first true leaves, like these are the cotyledons here's your first leaf, and then you get this very finely divided leaf, and it's kind of got a gray-green color because of the hairs on it and stuff. It's got lots of soft hairs on it. Seeing more and more of this throughout the province. I really thought this was more of a Saskatchewan or a Southwest Manitoba weed, but we are seeing lots of it. I've seen loads of it here in the central region, but it's pretty easy to kill. I'm not too terribly worried about it. Narrow-leaf toxbeard, this is a tougher one. It can get confused with things like any of the sow thistles or dandelions. Well, I find with narrow-leaf toxbeard, I find these leaves here in the center, it's hard to see from this angle of the photo, but they tend to grow straight up, whereas the thistles and the dandelions don't do that. You'll get some deep lobes in these leaves, and it kind of it'll be a rosette like this. The new leaves will always stand almost perfectly upright, and then as it bolts and puts more leaves on, the upper leaves are like grass-like. They're not divided at all, and the upper leaves look very, very different. But this is a tougher one to get because a lot of it is coming as a winter annual, and it can, again, these winter annuals can get really big really fast, and you got to get on these things pretty quick. Just to talk about our guide to field crop protection, they're available at all the service centers right now. And so in the guide to crop protection, when you're looking at going after some of these weeds right now, I know we've got some seeding going on right now, and so just watch your labels because some of the products are pre-seed, some are pre-emerge, which means they can go on after seeding, but they must be on prior to the crop emerging. So that's just something to be aware of. But we do have this table 16A and 16B. 16A is on page 85 this year. I do apologize. We had a new printer kind of join the team midway through doing the guide this year. We had to switch printers halfway through, and table 16A and 16B are supposed to be facing each other, and they are not. So that was an error at the printer, and I do apologize for that. We'll get that fixed for next year. But basically, table 16A is got crops across the top here, and basically these are herbicides to control emerged weeds before seeding or after seeding, but prior to crop emergence. But please watch your labels on that. And so here's all of your products down the side here. Sometimes if it's a generic product, it's something like bromoxynil, that would be Pardner, plus, a number of other brand names as well. And then sometimes something like Blackhawk or Blackhawk EVO, those are trade names. So looking at canola, we pick our products. There's a few products for canola, not nearly as many as something like for wheat, where you've got a big line, you've got pretty much everything here. But these are your burn-off tables. So 16A has the products and the crop that it's registered on. And then if you're looking at 16B, say we're still looking at canola, and there's bromoxynil, there's carfentrazone or Command, there's Certitude, there's Conquer, things like that. Here's Trigon, there's Prospect as well. And so then you can look at the weeds that those particular products do. So on the burn-off table, you'll see products in there. You will see sometimes in these burn-off tables, you'll see here for Trigon, the burn-off component, because that is just talking about the burn-off component of that product. And then when you go to the weed control tables in the guide, here's table 12 for canola. We have this separated now into pre-emerge that do have residual control and then post-emergent herbicides. And some of those products that are in the burn-off table are going to be in here as well. But in this table, that we're only going to talk about the residual weed control from whatever component in that product has a residual component, aspect to it. So again, looking at that Trigon, the residual component there is coming from the clomazone, which is really only doing cleavers, and it's got suppression of chickweed, but that's not on this chart in this list of weeds up here. And we don't have all the weeds listed. Sorry about that. So go to the page numbers. We just can't list them all up here. So if you go to the page numbers and take a look, the full list of weeds that are registered are on the product pages. And then, of course, also go to the guides, go to your labels as well. Those are available through PMRA. And the easiest way is just to search by PCP number, which is, again, are listed on our product pages. And so you can get a full label because the label is the legal document. But anyways, you can go take a look, go to the product pages based on page numbers. All of our herbicide, all of our tables will have this column as well, the herbicide mode of action group. So again, we're looking at here's 13 and 14. Add your ethylfluorine is group 3. This IPCO Trigon has a 6, a 13, and a 14 as well. And so for resistance management, for knowing that we have to be rotating through different products, this is very, very handy for you to keep that in mind when you're picking different products going forward. And then just a couple websites. I'll just finish with this, and then if we've got questions or if Lionel has some questions for me, we can take those. Just a website here. This is the Herbicide Resistant Action Committee website. Lots of information there about herbicide resistance. This is a really good website that talks a lot about cover crops, crop competition, harvest weed seed control, basically getting rid of weeds through integrated weed management, but it's really nothing to do with spraying. So it's a good site. There's a lot of really good information here. Again, just a different perspective on weed control, not involving chemical weed control. And then this Weed Smart site out of Australia is really good, really practical. And they've got a lot of really good farmer testimonials and things like that. And just more information from around the world from farmers who are battling herbicide resistant weeds and what they're doing to kind of combat that on their farms. So that is all I have. If you've got any questions, I will do my best to answer them.
Hey, Kim, maybe just keep your screen in case we have to go back or anything. But
Okay.
Okay, couple questions. First one is regarding pigweed, and a lot of it's starting to push up on the edges of fields. I guess any comments on pigweed and what you've been seeing with it in the past years?
Yeah. I know it's showing up now in the weed survey that we've got group 2 resistance. And I do think in some areas of the province we have a lot of group 2 resistant pigweed. So you need to be looking at at other products or making sure there's something other than a group 2 for going after that pigweed, and be really watching the group 3s as well. We know we're starting to see some, we haven't got official confirmations, but we do know we have some pockets of group 3 resistant pigweed in the province as well. So that's something to be aware of. It's very low level right now, and it's patchy in the fields where it's been found in. But again, it's something to be aware of. So you've got to start making sure you're using different products. And again, any of our charts, any of the charts at the front of the guide, red root pigweed's always in those charts. We don't have all the weeds listed because we don't have room to have all the weeds listed, but we'd have generally the most common weeds, and red root pigweed's always in that chart. So there's lots of products that are, really, really good pigweed products. The group 27s are really good. The group 15s are really good in general. So there is lots of really good products, and to make sure we're using something in addition to the group 2s, in addition to the group 3s, to make sure that they're still working.
Okay. Here's a question that I get quite a bit, and it's producer wants to grow canola, but he has a fair bit of dandelion growing in the field. Any recommendations as to what he can do as a burn off to slow those things down or get
Yeah.
ahead of them, I guess?
Well, that's a tough one. And knowing that there's dandelion in the field, that's a perennial weed. So that would have been an issue to hopefully be tackling, last year with some pre-harvest Roundup or pre-harvest glyphosate, or some fall spraying. Basically, the best time to go after dandelions is when the kids go back to school in September. Going after a perennial weed in the spring that's never the right time to do it. And especially with canola, that is a tough one. But we do have, there's a few products as well. There's not a lot of products that are safe ahead of canola, and something like the burn off products are there. I mean, you just don't have a lot, so it's unfortunate. But I would think, I don't know if that's on the prospect label. Just let me take a quick look. But we basically got prospect and certitude, and then we've got some just kind of straight contact herbicides like bromoxynil and that type of thing. And there's, again, just whatever's in the chart is the only thing that's registered, and that is just a really tough thing to go after perennial weeds in the fall. But I think I'm just looking at the prospect. Prospect, I think, would maybe be maybe one of your better choices to try ahead of canola, because you'll have some success with dandelions on that one. And I think I'm just looking at the product pages now, and they say suppression of rosettes up to 15 centimeters. So that's over a foot across. So that's a pretty big size dandelion. So that would be probably what I would start with if I was going to choose a product. I think I'd maybe look at that one first. But you have to look at all the weeds that are there too. So you have to look at all of them. Depends. If dandelion's your driver weed, then probably I'd be looking at prospect.
And one of the questions I always get is if they could add some 2,4-D or something in it, but that'll leave a residual on the soil, right?
It can. And it can. It's not registered. You could get away with it, maybe. Depends if you got lots of soil moisture and you got good growing conditions. There is 2,4-D and MCPA2 they do have a short residual in the soil. But again, it's, what do you think you can get away with, and how badly do you need to be using that? So again, I would not be recommending that. If it happens by accident, I think sometimes you can get away with it, but it's not something that we would ever recommend because it might not work. And with canola seed becoming more and more expensive every year, that's not something I'd want to be risking. But yeah, there can be residues from 2,4-D for sure.
Okay, here's another one. Are you noticing more of these ditch weeds like cockle moving into fields more due to the lack of 2,4-D being used, with chem being used at two-leaf cereals more and more?
I don't know that. I'm not sure. Like, I've seen things like I've been in areas where there's just always those weeds are in the field anyways. I'm not sure that I would consider like night fly and catch fly and cowcockle and things like that, a ditch weed. When I think ditch weeds, I'm thinking, more like things like milkweed and stuff like that. That's really starting to move into the fields. And I don't know. I think as we change our cropping patterns and as we change, the amount of tillage we're doing, I think we definitely do see shifts in weed communities, and that's why, you see those shifts over time. That's why we do the weed surveys. We try to do them at regular intervals, and we look for shifts over time because we do know that we change weed communities with the practices that we do, and so I think it's on an individual basis, you can see some of that happening, but I wouldn't say overall I'm seeing a lot of that. But I think that does happen definitely in certain places just based on what's been happening in those fields in the last number of years.
Okay, and a comment came in regarding the dandelion. It says basically all you can do for that dandelion now is 2.25 full liters of glyphosate.
Well, like I said, I think, prospect, I think is ahead of canola. I mean, ahead of wheat, you can do lots. There's lots of really, really great products, and there's really great products like Smolder from BSF's excellent. There's tons of excellent products that will do a really good job on a lot of weeds. Ahead of canola, it's tough because you just don't have a lot of products. But again, that's something, if it's something to talk to your Corteva rep about. Dandelion is on the label for prospect. It's registered prior to seeding. Now that one has to be prior to seeding, not prior to emergence. So that's something that you need to be aware of. But making sure, you've got glyphosate with that as well. And you're using usually anywhere from a half a liter to a liter of glyphosate. If you were using just straight glyphosate going after dandelion, yeah, you need a lot more. You need a lot of glyphosate to go after perennial weeds in the spring. If you're going after quackgrass or thistles or dandelion, you need a lot more to go after that because it's going after perennial weeds in the spring is never the right time of year to do that. And so if this is a problem, again, it's something to be aware of and to be looking at what I'm doing for pre-harvest and for fall weed control, because that's when you go after your perennials and then they're less of a problem the following year.
Okay, and then just one more. Lamb's quarters are pushing up already
Yeah.
on some sandy ridges.
Yeah.
Seen some coming up yesterday with cotyledons, and it's just starting to open up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think they're just coming. I think we're a touch early. I haven't seen any, but again, I haven't been out and about like all of our agronomists and our farmers have. So I haven't seen any, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them. And for sure by next week. Like, I mean, you look at the temperatures coming, they are going to explode. So I think we need to be ready to be on that. I know everybody's going to be seeding, and it's always really tough to get those sprayers going when you need to be seeding as well. But it's always a good idea to get the weeds out early, get them out when they're small. Even if you think they're not going to do much to yield, they do. And to try to do something to get them burnt off and get them out of there, it just helps get that crop going faster. And then when you do come back in crop, when that crop has to be, at a minimum stage before you can spray it, like, in order to be safely sprayed, in order for that crop, in order to, put a herbicide on a crop safely, there's a minimum staging on that crop usually. And sometimes by the time, like if we already have lamb's quarters coming out of the ground, even by early next week, we see it more consistently across the province. By the time those crops are seeded and up, those lamb's quarters are way too big in crop. And I think you're going to see some misses. And I do think that's what happens a lot of times with lamb's quarters every year. It's just too big. We're spraying it too late. So a burn off on that, if they're up already, is really beneficial.
Great. Okay, Kim, thanks for the good presentation, and thanks a lot for all the questions that were coming in. There were a lot of good questions and good discussion. So thanks again, Kim. Okay, just a few things to finish up for today. A little bit about the crop report. As we did talk a little bit, some of the cereals are starting to go in. The winter wheat and fall rye, from what looks like so far, looks like it survived the winter and still needs some time before we do make any assessments as to whether if we have a poor field or not. But I think in general, I think most of them are greening up pretty good. There has been some wheat going in the ground, and some areas started to put some oats in already. From everything we've seen or put together, oil seeds, still nothing going in yet. Peas, I guess they'd be the ones that have been going in. I know a few farmers that are putting some in, and I think in the report it was through the central, eastern, and interlake regions where peas were going in already. So where do we sit as a province for seeded acreage as of I guess just before May 1st? We're sitting right now at 3%. Last year we were at 2%, and our 5-year average is 1%. So hard to believe in some areas with all that snow we had that we're still going ahead. And as Kim said, if we get the weather like they're forecasting, we could see a lot of crop going in within the next week here. So we could see some pretty good jumps. Yield responses, we're right in the prime area for getting our best yields if we're getting the crop in now. So that's always good to hear as well. Soil temperatures, I've been checking them lately and I'm getting a range. I guess depends on what time of day you take them. I always tell guys to, take one in the morning and or one kind of at that 10 o'clock in the morning and one at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon and do an average because when you look at some of the temperatures for crop germination, probably that 3 to 5 degrees for most of the cereals. But remember, with canola, we don't want it to sit in the ground very long, so try to get it around that 10. And so we're still, when you look at, I took this off the website off our weather systems yesterday afternoon, and at about 5:15 in Oakburn area here, we were sunny here, so the soil temperature was around 7. Brandon, North Hill was at 5, and Portage was at 2. But I think around Portage they were talking it being a little bit cloudier yesterday, so maybe they weren't getting the heat from the sun at that time, and so it was starting to cool off a little bit too. Just a couple more things. I just want to check here. I think I might have had another question come in here. Okay, just somebody making a comment that wheat, oats, peas, and some corn in Elm Creek area starting to go in Elm Creek to Starbuck area. Soybeans are going to start going in on Monday. Well, I don't know if Dennis Lang's on yet or not, but I would wonder if he would say, are we too early yet, but I guess we'll see.
I don't see Dennis on.
Okay. Kim's got her hand up. What do you want to say, Kim?
Oh, I totally forgot that we are having Weed Seedling ID Day. Sorry, I don't know. I should have mentioned it. I don't have a poster for it yet, but May 21st. So basically back to the third Wednesday in May, like it went on for about 35 years before COVID. And I think it's going to be in the afternoon. I haven't decided that. We used to usually started at 1 o'clock. So that's going to be the one that's in Carmen at the U of M farm. And then we will have one in Brandon at ACC. We haven't got the date set on that one for sure. We're just kind of going to see how their weed garden looks. They have a really great site there with a weed garden and weeds growing. Mine are just weeds that are dug up out of field and brought in, so it's a little bit different. Anyways, that's usually a week to 10 days after. So I would hope it would be the very end of the month or maybe beginning of June, but we'll see how that goes. So May 21st for that. They're free. They're open to the public. They're open to whoever wants to come. And so there'll be a little bit more information coming forward on that. But that's a good thing, a good training opportunity for some young people and agronomists and farmers. Everybody's welcome to come. So I, again, apologize. I should have mentioned that in my talk that we will have that again this year.
Great, thanks, Kim. Those are always good days. So if anybody is wanting to get a little bit more hands-on, I guess that's what I liked about them. They're hands-on, and you can grab the weeds and take a good look at what they look like. So a lot of people there too that could help and show you the identifying factors to look for. So good days. Diversification centers. I mentioned this the last couple webinars. Crop Talks, WADO, PSI, PCDF, MCDC, those are the dates they're planning their summer tours, so mark those in your calendars. If you're wanting more information on the days, this is the information and the contact people at those locations, so definitely get talking to those people. Your crop production extension specialist. There's our contact information. So as you're getting in the field and you're seeing stuff that you want a second opinion on, or you maybe need some help figuring out, get a hold of us. If we can't help you, there's people like Kim, John Gavlowski, Dennis Lang, our Carmen people are there ready to help. So our livestock people, their contact information is here. If you got questions regarding getting ready for pasture, getting cattle ready for pasture, all that kind of stuff, definitely get a hold of them. Our MASC offices, if you're needing a field crop production guide, they're there and available there. Reminder, the livestock price insurance, June 12th is the deadline. So if you're looking at insuring your calves for this year, definitely start looking at that. There's the office number. So you have questions regarding any of their programs, definitely call them. And if you got questions regarding the CropTalk information, wanting to talk to any of the presenters, definitely give us a call. There's my contact information and Lori's, and we'll see you May 7th. And we'll be talking about how many acres we've got planted already. Thanks for joining us.